Today I want to run through the basics of a hand plane and talk about why you would want one, where you might get one, and we'll get into the anatomy of a plane because you need to know a little bit about the anatomy in order to get it set up to function properly. So when you're milling wood, you generally want to end up, if you're doing furniture or most anything that you're making, you want to end up with a smooth, flat surface, and you want the surfaces to be perpendicular to one another. So, on a board, we want to make this board flat on all four sides, and we want to make flat means it's in the same plane. Okay, so there are no ups and downs, even minute ones. You want to get rid of those. And you want to make sure that this surface here is perpendicular to this surface there. And the mechanisms, the machines that we use to accomplish that vary. We can use a hand plane to smooth this and to make it flat. We can use a sander or a hand sanding to make this smooth, but that will not guarantee making it flat, because if you spend more time or force in one area with a sandpaper than you do in another, you will get undulations in the surface. And then there are planers, electric planers, that have plane blades that spin, and you pass the wood across those plane blades. A planer makes a surface flat so that it's the same the whole way. There are no undulations, and it makes it fairly smooth but not completely smooth. So to get flat and square and smooth, you want to either use an electric planer, and you pass the wood through that and then you sand it, or you want to use a hand plane to get it flat and fairly smooth. And if that's not smooth enough, then you can finish up by sanding that very carefully so that you don't gouge out any holes in it. So that's an overview of how you mill the surface of wood in your projects. Today, we're doing an introduction to the hand plane and the basics there, so you'll know that part. So I use hand planes to surface generally more narrow pieces of wood and to get them completely flat. There's also a numbering system for the planes. We'll go through the numbers, but the numbers do not imply how thick a shaving it takes. What that tells you is it's something about the purpose of that particular plane and why we would have each one of those. So you may do mainly sanding, but oftentimes there will be a use for trying to get the surface of a board completely flat, and sanders don't do that, but planes can. Now, this is probably the most common hand plane ever made. The style is called Bailey, B-A-I-L-E-Y, because the inventor was named Bailey. And the most common Bailey plane is made by Stanley and has been for nearly 100 years. And this is a Stanley Bailey number 4. I bought this on eBay, and you can get reasonable deals on hand planes like this vintage hand plane on eBay, and you can save yourself some money. You may need to fix that plane up a little bit, but the basics of the plane are not very difficult to understand, and let's dive into that. First of all, the plane has a sole that's as close to flat as you can make it. So it's quite important that this surface be completely flat and completely smooth. And then the edges of the plane should be perfectly perpendicular to the bottom of the plane, to the sole of the plane. And it's very important that it's flat along its surface and that it's perpendicular to the side. Now, the working part of the plane is a plane iron. A plane iron is a piece of iron or steel in our case, that's used for planing wood. This smooth, shiny surface is a plane iron. And I will separate it from this other piece of metal that's up against it, which is called a chip breaker. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. So this is a basic plane iron. The important thing about a plane iron, the way something becomes sharp and is able to cut, is that you get two perfectly flat surfaces clear out to the edge, and that edge meets, and each one of those surfaces is perfectly flat. So to tune up a hand plane, the first thing you do is you flatten the bottom of this plane iron. You don't need to worry about the top of the plane iron. That never comes in contact with the wood, and that's not part of the edge. The other surface that needs to be perfectly flat is this leading edge, which looks like it's at a 30-degree angle here. And if you look very closely and we get the light right, you'll see that it's shiny smooth like a mirror out here on the end. And we got it that way by polishing it with a water stone. There are other technologies that you can use. I generally use water stones. So the chip breaker is a much less expensive grade of steel, because it's not very important. It's pretty flat, except at the end it's kind of cupped. And so what you want to do is you want to put that right up against, almost up against the working edge, bottom edge of the plane iron. And then you tighten down the screw. A regular screwdriver will be fine. I use this because it gives you a lot of mechanical advantage, and it's specifically designed. But you don't need one of these. So now we've put this back together, and we have the chip breaker and we have this beveled surface. These planes work with the beveled surface down and the chip breaker on top. So when we put this in here, it's gonna go along the wood like this. The wood will get, it'll take a shaving of the wood, and this will break the chip so that it doesn't give you an uneven surface. So we simply now put this in here like this. And this holds the plane iron in, and you have some mechanical advantage here. Looks like this one isn't very tight. Like so. So now we have the blade that we just put in there that is going to protrude slightly from the bottom of the plane. And we control that with this mechanism right here, which is a wheel that can be turned. And as the wheel is turned, it pushes the plane iron down, or if you reverse it, it pulls the plane iron out. So now we have to get the blade of the plane just protruding from the sole. And the way I do that is I take a white surface like this, and I just look down it, and you can see the plane iron coming through when it does start to come through. And also you can see whether it's coming through evenly across its surface, because you do want it to come through evenly. If it doesn't come through evenly, there's a mechanism on here which goes left or right, which skews the plane iron in its holder, left or right, to expose more or less of one side or the other. So the way you do this is you look through here against a piece of paper, and you turn that until you get what looks like an even amount of the blade on both sides. In my case, it's just slightly off center. Now we take a shaving. You probably heard that. So this is the shaving we've taken, and that looks fairly thin, but it's really not all that thin. This is probably a couple thousandths of an inch thick. But if your plane iron is sharp and you feel this now, it will be smooth and it will be flat. We can adjust our plane so that there is more or less of the blade protruding to give us different thicknesses of shavings. So you see this plane I have adjusted so that it gives you really, really thin, 1/1000th of an inch maybe. And so that will take real thin shavings and will be extremely smooth. So this is a Stanley Bailey number 4 plane. Here is a modern day number 4 plane, and it refers to the width of the sole, the width of the plane iron, and the length of the sole. Now planes come, this is called a smoothing plane, and planes come numbered according to the size of the plane iron, the size of this surface. So here is a number 6 plane, which is generally referred to as a jack plane. So as opposed to a smoother, where a smoothing plane takes a very fine shaving and gives you a smoothing action, this number 6 jack plane is used to take a lot off at a time. So if you have to plane a lot of stuff off, you would want to use a plane like this and take bigger shavings and deeper cut. If you really want to do that, this is also a number 6. And this, by the way, I said number 6, this is a number 5. So we have a 4, a 5, and now this is a 6, and it's a larger jack plane, and it takes, it's used for taking a lot of material off, but keeping the surface flat. And you can tell that it's used to keep it flat by this extreme length of the sole here. So the number 6 takes off a lot of material, but keeps the work fairly flat. The number 7, which is very big, very long, and very heavy, and this is called a jointer plane. Its purpose is to make sure that from end to end, that surface is in a single plane. There are no dips in it. And the length of the sole of this plane means that as you take a shaving, you'll get an even one all the way across, and when you do, you know this is perfectly flat and in the same plane. These larger special purpose planes you can also sometimes find on eBay. This plane, jointer plane, I bought new because I couldn't find one online. This is a Lee Nielsen plane. They're a manufacturer of very good hand planes. This one I bought on eBay, and it's a Bailey plane made by Stanley again, and it's quite old. So this is probably from the 30s or the 40s. To recap, the plane is used to take wood off a surface to make it smooth and to make it flat and to make it the surface in a single plane. And they're not very expensive. You have to learn how to sharpen. So you have to be able to sharpen the plane iron, and you have to learn how to set the plane up, which is really quite simple. If you like what you see, be sure and like this video, and also subscribe so that you can see future content.